Greetings, YouTube. As I mentioned in an earlier video, I do not base my moral compass off of a religious belief, a holy book. I base it on a philosophy that I read, The Moral Rules by Gert, the subcontext being a new rational foundation for morality. I found this book at a bargain bin. I thought the title was provocative. I picked it up, and it literally changed the way I look at the world. Gert puts forth an idea that morality can be based on rational thought, that it can be based on the concept that there are rules. He picks 10. For some reasons he picks them simply because 10 is a handy number, because humans tend to think in tens, but he also picks 10 because of the 10 Commandments. He's trying to mirror what he considers to be an irrational set of moral codes with a rational one. And it also based on reciprocity, the concept that he follows these rules because he believes that all other people should follow these rules so that they in turn will not harm him in kind. He also one of the foundations of this belief is that rational men will follow this, and that of course irrational men, those who are unbalanced, cannot be counted on to have a set of moral codes which can be depended upon. And this is how he defines rational. One might argue as follows: to act contrary to one's self-interest for no reason is to act irrationally, which isn't a bad definition of rational behavior. So, these are in essence what he's discussing. I do not hold that all of these rules are of equal rank. Normally, certain rules, e.g. against killing, take precedence over others. We now have 10 rules. Rule 1, don't kill. Rule 2, don't cause pain. Rule 3, don't disable. Rule 4, don't deprive of freedom or opportunity. Rule 5, don't deprive of pleasure. Rule 6, don't deceive. Rule 7, keep your promise. Rule 8, don't cheat. Rule 9, obey the law. And Rule 10, do your duty. It should be remembered that I regard the second rule as prohibiting various forms of mental suffering as well as physical pain. Towards each of these rules, the following public attitude would be taken by all rational men. Everyone is always to obey the rules except when he could publicly abdicate violating it. Anyone who violates the rule when he would not publicly abdicate such a violation may be punished. I call this the moral attitude. Any rule toward which all rational men would publicly abdicate the moral attitude has all of these characteristics. Thus, by showing that there are some rules toward which all rational men would publicly advocate the moral attitude, we have shown that some rules are genuine moral rules. Now, the exception clause is such that if you feel a law is unjust, one of these rules runs counter to a situation. For example, it says, don't deprive of pleasure. Taking money from someone, put into a public fund that would benefit the police or the fire department, could be construed as denying someone of pleasure. You've taken their money away, and they now don't have that cash to do as they wish. And if you could publicly abdicate, I don't think we should tax those people for this reason, then that could be legitimately shown as an exception to this one of these rules. For example, do not deprive of freedom or opportunity, again, could also be construed as theft or incarceration. But taxation is not theft, and if a person has broken a moral rule, they may need to be incarcerated as a form of punishment. So I'm going to briefly run down these rules and how I think they apply to the world around me. Of course, the first, don't kill. I don't want to be killed, and so by an act of reciprocity, I do not kill others. There could be exceptions to these rules. Euthanasia is an example. A person is ill, they don't want to live any longer. They can publicly abdicate that I am sick, I don't want to live any longer. If they do this, that's rational, it makes sense, and they could legitimately be allowed to kill themselves or someone else kill them without violating that moral rule. In addition, you have self-defense. If someone attacks me, their consent is implied, because while they may want me to stand there and not defend myself, they are assuming that the person they're attacking is going to defend themselves, and so they are implying consent. Defending one's country or an ally in the event of war is another example. You were not being aggressive, you were acting in a defensive manner, you did not instigate the situation, you were simply responding to someone else's violent action. Second rule, don't cause pain. Again, if you want to engage in an activity that involves pain, sports, body modification, something like that, certain kinds of sexual expression, since you are giving consent, and as an adult you have that capacity, then it's allowed. In the concept of medical aid, if a person is unconscious, their consent is implied because they cannot respond. In the event of medical treatments for a minor, the parent or guardian gives consent for that child, but that person cannot give consent to have pain inflicted upon that child for any reason other than medical necessity. Don't disable. Again, don't cause harm or maim someone so that they are unable to function, unable to live their life the way they wish to. Covered, don't deprive of freedom and opportunity. Don't deprive of pleasure. Don't take someone else's pleasurable experiences or activities away, except as a form of punishment because they violated one of these rules. Don't deceive. Deception harms the very foundation of agreements, business actions, legal behavior, things like that. Keep your promises. Again, if your word is not your bond, then there cannot be a social contract. Don't cheat. Plays into the same concept. If you're cheating the system, don't be surprised if people publicly abdicate, you be fined or incarcerated. And they very well find people who agree with them. Obey the law. Now, obeying the law makes sense so long as you do not consider that law to be unjust, immoral, and if you publicly advocate that this law is unjust or immoral, then breaking that unjust or immoral law would be called for. And lastly, is the most problematic, is do your duty. What does that mean? It's been used by totalitarian societies in the past to justify some horrible behaviors. But so long as you cannot publicly state that your duty is to harm or cause pain or suffering to another, then you should follow that duty. If your duty is to violate one of these other moral laws, then you cannot follow that duty, and you would have to violate your duty. So these are a series of exceptions rather than a series of codes that are necessarily followed. And pretty much Gert is saying that anything that doesn't fall into these specific exceptions is allowed. Yes, I know this is a lot to handle all at once, and this video is running a little long. I'm looking at a timer. But I may follow up with a later video on this concept. But these are the rules that I've been following, and they work for me, and I like them. And it's refreshing to know that I'm following something I consider to be rational.